We should come together with Democrats and say, you too love America. And so you need to understand this fundamental thing about America, which is the government doesn't give you any rights. But lest we be confused, the founders agreed on a compromise in Philadelphia in 1787 and 1788, and that is that they would list a bunch of the most important rights just as a didactic measure. And so they said, this is not in the Constitution. The Constitution is about us, the people, giving the government the limited powers. The people have the limitless rights, but let's go ahead and name some of them just to be sure no one ever forgets. So we'll name the most important thing first. So what's the First Amendment? What's the one thing that had to be listed first? They couldn't do it, right? The First Amendment is a laundry list. Speech, press, religion, assembly, the right of redress of grievances. It's a dog's breakfast. They took everything important and they said, how could you have freedom of religion if you couldn't assemble? How could you have freedom of speech if you couldn't write it down and disseminate it, if you couldn't publish it? How can we, the people, actually be in charge of this if we can't tell the government that they're wrong and protest? And so they stuff all this important stuff in the First Amendment because they couldn't list anything without listing kind of everything. And then you run through the Bill of Rights, and what are the 9th and 10th Amendments? It's a screaming sermon that there's no end to the list. The 9th and 10th Amendments say, and oh, by the way, if there were any powers we didn't give to the federal government, we really meant it. The only governments that could ever exercise them are now are state and local. And if there are any freedoms we didn't exist, all of those still exist, and they're for the people. And so the ocean is the limitless rights of the people, and the island is the tiny little set of enumerated powers that we give to the government. And that's what American exceptionalism means. And we are not teaching that. Our kids don't know. And so we have to be the adults in the conversation, not that says the identity of the Republican Party is saying the Democrats are terrible. The first thing we have to say is, whoa, 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 we're going to fight about a lot of things, about the level of government intervention in the economy and whether or not a $9 minimum wage or a $15 minimum wage actually does more net good or harm. All that stuff's important, but hey, Democrats, before we fight about that, how about all 320 million of us agree that fundamental to American identity is limits on government? Because the things that really matter are the places where you worship, and the places where you raise your kids, and the places where you convene around a dinner table with your friends, and the places where you go to work to live out a life of gratitude by trying to love your neighbor. Who are the least happy people on earth? We actually know. From empirical data, you can study this. Who are the least, when we say the least happy people in first world nations? So if you don't go to bed every night with your stomach hurting because you don't have enough food, or if you're not in the midst of war at the present time, if you live in a first world nation, who are the least happy people? Lottery winners. Truly. The data shows the least happy people, followed closely by folks that have lots and lots of inherited money and their parents didn't figure out a way to get them a work ethic. It turns out if you expand the denominator of your consumption and you never learned how to produce, it isn't, the thing that makes you happy in life isn't how much you can produce. It isn't how much you consume. It's thinking that your production matters and finding a way to limit your consumption needs so that you can do even more to love your neighbor. The things that make you happy are related to people that you actually know and that love you. And what is going to make America great again is recovering a sense of those things. But we're entering an age where people are going to have shorter and shorter durations of jobs, more and more potential to be unhappy because they don't have meaningful work, more and more technology that's going to make more and more of their lives obsolete. And in the midst of that uncertainty, and in the midst of that fear, they're going to cry out for more government. Almost all of our neighbors are going to want government to grow. We think that's bad policy. We think that will harm them. But before we go to war over every fight about that, we better first persuade them that we have a bigger vision of America, a bigger vision of human anthropology and of human happiness, a bigger vision of neighborliness. When I was getting on the plane this morning to fly here, I was texting with a buddy of mine right as the plane was taking off, and he's my age, but his dad's about the age of my grandpa. And so he has a father who was in his 90s. And so it wasn't a surprise when his dad died last week. My friend is a minister. And I said, hey, I've just been thinking about you. My family and I have been praying for you. You know, your dad was suffering a little bit there at the end. And he texted me back and he said, thanks, pray for me especially tomorrow. I want to be able to keep it together. I'm delivering the sermon at the funeral tomorrow. And I'm writing it today. And he said, I'm worried because it's a really mixed group of friends my dad had. He lived a long time, lots of different people from lots of different communities, and I'm worried about striking the right note of what I need to say to honor my dad and saying bigger things. And he said, my sermon is entitled, Why We Weep and Why We Hope. And I paused to think, he and I have a shared worldview. We have theological alignment about what we believe, about why we weep and why we hope. And he's telling me he's going to an audience of a whole bunch of people that might have different visions of that. You know the one thing I'm sure of? Nobody in the midst of a serious funeral tomorrow is going to think the really big things you weep and hope about are these political parties. Because these things aren't enduring. They are important, but they're not enduring. And the best way to be a great Republican, the best way to be able to argue for the policies that we believe in this room, which do matter, which do have real world consequences, is to be sure people who listen to us, when we're trying to persuade them of that, know that we don't put identities in politics anywhere near the top order of the identities we really care about. Because those are going to be the things that define whether we get a hearing, and those are going to be the things that define whether or not we really pass on the America that matters to the next generation, which is an America that our founders rightly understood to be a place where government isn't the center. Government is a tool that creates room for the real centers. The creed that Margaret Thatcher talked about for us is the sense we have in human dignity. The sense we have that the places in Travis County where you worship and where you work and where you raise your kids and where you feel pain when your friends feel pain, this is the center of the world. And Fremont, Nebraska is the center of the world. And it will be on us if we ever act like Washington, D.C. is really the center of the world. Thanks for having me.